So thank you. Okay, so thank you, Anna. Next panel, we're going to do, well, the panel is called Unlocking Finance for the Green Transition and Fostering Partnerships, but you will see throughout the panel that maybe we're not only unlocking finance, but analyzing other aspects. But basically what we want is to highlight the complexity of the green transition, and we want to emphasize that there are no perfect solutions, only strategic decisions that must be taken despite uncertainties. So as I said before, our role here also, or our goal here for the conference is that you understand different stakeholder perspectives. And this is why we have our panelists, each of them are coming from a different background. First, we have Elena Piñez, who serves as a member of the European Union Platform for Sustainable Finance and also chairs the Spanish Financial Markets Authority, CNMV, Sustainable Finance Committee. And she brings a deep expertise in ESG integration, corporate responsibility, and aligning financial flows with environmental and social goals. Then we have Antoni Vallabriga, who's the global head of responsible business or sustainability at BBVA. And he's also co-chair of UNEP FI Banking Board. So Tony brings experience integrating ESG into corporate strategy and developing sustainable financial products and advancing green finance agenda from and within the private sector. Juan Carlos del Rio currently serves as the Director for Strategy and Sustainability at the Spanish Banking Association, where he works at the intersection of monetary policy, ESG integration, and financial supervision. So Juan Carlos plays a vital role here in shaping the regulatory environment also in Spain that enables a just and systemic transition. And I don't have here the CV of Gonzalo de la Sanz de Miera, but I know him very well, so I'll say by heart. So Gonzalo Sanz de Miera, he's the head of partnerships at Iberdrola, and he's also vice president of the, I'll say it in Spanish, this Grupo Español de Crecimiento Verde, and I think he brings a lot of knowledge regarding decarbonization and transformation from the corporate side. So what we aim, thanks for you, to all of you for coming. So what we're going to do is first, Elena is going to start with an overview of the state of the art in regards to taxonomy and regulation and give her perspective from the Board on Sustainable Finance. And then each of the members of the panel can join us here in the stage, and we will have some conversation on this. Thank you.
No, nothing. Can you hear me well? Because I have two mics. Yeah, there you go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. They say that time offers wisdom, right? Well, not to everyone, as we have seen lately. And certainly, you know, there are different levels of wisdom that we acquire over time. But with hindsight, you know, I believe that the Green Deal should have been framed as the deal for the 21st century European competitiveness. And we should have taken a lot more care of really integrating the competition dimension to every single sectoral policies and to every single of the policies and regulations, you know, linked to the Green Deal. Today, more than ever, competitiveness is a must. And yet, a dangerous narrative is emerging, yeah? One that wrongly pits sustainability against competitiveness. And when in reality, we have just heard the previous speakers, but when in reality, let's deconstruct it. Sustainability is about decarbonization. It's about climate resilience. It's about efficient resource use, and it's about circular economy. Which one of this is not going to fuel competitiveness in Europe, in a region where we need energy security and independence, and where we need access to critical materials? So this brings to us to two key questions, which are at the very core of today's panel, which is, the panel is about unlocking finance into the green, for a green transition. So let's deconstruct it. There are two questions. On one hand, how we can unlock finance and scale it up. And on the other hand, how can we ensure that that finance actually goes into real green transition, into real sustainable investment? So let's start with the first one, yeah? And how to unlock finance. I'm going to really narrow it down. I know I'm oversimplifying the debate, but let's narrow it down to two key challenges. The first one is fragmentation. We speak about a single market, but in reality, when it comes to the financial sector, we operate really in 27 fragmented, financial markets, 27 regulatory frameworks. The European Central Bank, we also have read the letter report, who really, hits the nail on the head, as they say, have highlighted that national differences in areas such as, let's look at corporate law, let's look at governance, voting right, insolvency frameworks, and last but not least, tax policies. All of them really hinder investment across the market, across a unified market, across, borders. These disparities act as, as substantial impediments, that some actually equate them to high levels of tariffs. In a recent article, I don't know how many of you read the article in the Financial Times, written by Draghi, who actually mentions and cites the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which estimates, that using their estimates, and indicates that Europe's internal barriers are the equivalent when it comes to manufacturing to 45%, and when it comes to service to 110%, yeah? And within this context, are particularly startups and small businesses the one that faces the greatest challenges. The EU is actually a land where startups flourish. The problem is that, they struggle to scale. They struggle to expand beyond borders. And the main challenge, in many areas, I would say in most areas, is not innovation itself. It's actually access to capital and the right growth pathways. Scaling up requires deeper, and more accessible capital markets. And in this context, we need to ask ourselves a key question. Is it really, honestly, really EU regulation the problem? Or why? Or should we start thinking ourselves to the extent to which the problem actually might be that we have an EU regulation plus 27, national regulations, When it comes to sustainable finance, I would argue, and I would challenge anyone who disagrees, but I would say that the EU Sustainable Finance Framework has done so much more to integrate sustainable finance, to really unite the way that we report, and the way that we channel and mobilize capital, in this case, sustainable finance. And yes, we all agree that we need simplification. Yes, we need greater, consistency. And from someone who has been working on this since the very inception, I can tell you, people sometimes forget about the level of novelty when it comes to the taxonomy and the rest of the regulations in the sustainable finance package. And they also forget that, each one of the pieces of this great jigsaw that we call the Sustainable Finance Framework had been negotiated and developed separately. Yeah, and that has created a lot of inconsistencies, because when you put them then together, they don't quite fit, but they were thought as one strategy. So now, yes, we need to polish it. But that doesn't mean that we need to throw the baby with the bath water, yeah? Maybe the regulatory simplification exercise should start really looking at simplifying national regulations, and starting to really integrate it with the EU, let alone when it comes to implementation and supervision. The second challenge that we face is that European capital markets are operating far well below their potential. Mobilizing just a fraction of European savings will transform the landscape. Households in the EU hold between 10 to 11.5 trillion in cash of euros, in cash and deposits, and that capital is not really reaching all the businesses, that are in need of capital. If we could align the EU households investment ratios with that of the EU, we could redirect up to 8 trillion euros into market-based investments. We'll have enough money for the green transition, the digital transition, and the rest of the EU priorities. The Investment and Savings Union is therefore an immense opportunity for helping financing the green transition. But the Investment and Savings Union cannot be developed in isolation and cannot be developed without putting sustainable finance framework at the very, very heart. They need to go hand in hand. Which brings me to the second question of today. How can we ensure that capital, those 8 trillions that now we have found, they go really into sustainable investment? And here is where the EU taxonomy and the sustainable finance framework comes into place, because they were done, their actual objective was precisely that one, to mobilize capital towards sustainable investments. We need to remember that we only have 25 years left to reach carbon neutrality. And that means if you look at the average lifespan of an asset, thinking about equipment and thinking about infrastructure, which is around 24 years, it means that any investment that we do today, they need to be already fit for purpose, because otherwise we're going to have to reinvest again, which is not quite an efficient way of using our limited, financial resources. And that's why, the taxonomy is so important, because the taxonomy ensures that those investments are done as close as possible to net zero or to best, economically and technological viable practice today. Now, I always said that CapEx, those capital expenditures, have been in alignment with the taxonomy, has been the biggest and greatest contribution of the taxonomy to the debate. Because what the taxonomy does is help to guide those investments from company going to the right direction, ensuring that they actually meet, contribute to the EU objectives. It directs those investments. Now, not in vain, the Sustainable Finance Framework not only aimed to mobilize the capital, but equally to really tackle one of the biggest obstacles that had been identified over and over as the main obstacles for green financial products and instruments to grow, which is the fears of greenwashing, to provide investors, particularly retail investors, with that reinsurance to protect them. Yeah. And so the question at this point should be, okay, we had already 2 years of taxonomy implementation. It's not yet finished, but we have 2 years of implementation. So what have been the results? Well, in only 2 years, and looking only at the top 1,700 companies in Europe, listed companies, because those are the only ones that are obliged to report, we have already, the taxonomy has already guided 530 billion in climate mitigation investments mainly. I have to say that there's very small percentage that actually goes into adaptation. That's something that aligns with the previous presentation from Ana Belén, and we have a real issue about, not investing enough in adaptation. I leave it there. So, but also interesting enough, besides those companies, what we have found is that companies who are not obliged are starting to report. This year, 256 companies outside of the scope have reported, of which 174 outside of the EU. So why would anyone, particularly outside of the EU, would report on the taxonomy, go through what is being said, to be an incredible struggle, in order to report, like I said, because they know that investors are starting to really look at, the taxonomy, particularly about, looking at how they invest that capex and the extent to which it's aligned with the taxonomy and how it fits into their transition plans. In other words, because they know that if they report and the numbers are relatively decent, they're going to be more attractive to investors. And in fact, we're seeing emerging sell-side analysis and studies that show the correlation between market performance and taxonomy alignment. Besides, what we call the success on the ground of the taxonomy, despite some simplifications that need to be done, particularly do no significant harm, I think that by now we have very well identify what works and what doesn't work. Besides that, we also have had successes in the sustainable finance framework, such as the EU climate benchmarks, who have already, collected 180 billions in assets under management. But particularly, I want to highlight one of the biggest successes, which is partially thanks to the regulation, partially thanks to the commitment of asset owners and asset managers across Europe, which is that the European, financial market today is 62% ESG. That means that it's primarily ESG in terms of assets under management. The ESG has been the fastest growing, or one of the fastest growing assets in the EU. Now, this means that the package has not only, helping to mobilize capital, but it has also made Europe, the leading market in the world. The EU is the global benchmark. The sustainability reporting standards inspired international ones, not the other way around. The EU taxonomy has inspired 58 taxonomies in the world. There are more than 60, I think it is 65% of the global GDP is under a taxonomy, something that we need to remember. The rest of the world, goes on, and they're also catching up when it comes to sustainable finance regulation. Europe continues to dominate the EU green bond market and the sustainable fund market, holding 2.7 trillion in assets, by and large the largest in the world. Now, what is really interesting is that we've seen since the last quarter, the end of last quarter, and the beginning of this quarter, we've seen incredible net inflows going into European sustainable finance, and some of them coming from, I would say a good portion, coming from the other side of the Atlantic. And this is because, they're asset owners, European asset owners, UK and EU asset owners, who are repatriating their billions, their assets from the US to Europe. Why? Because they are concerned about climate risk management, because they want to ensure that they can meet their fiduciary duties in the long term and their ability to meet those duties. And they know how important it is to well manage climate and the rest of the environmental risks. Now, leadership is not a given, right? We've seen now Singapore and Hong Kong, catching up rapidly, developing the policies, but you need to start looking at, their narrative, and you will realize that many of them are aiming, including London, to be the sustainable finance hub in the world. So we must not squander our position and this powerful tool that sometimes we forget of green diplomacy, that comes with it. So in a nutshell, yes, we need simplification. Greater effectiveness is desirable, but we must be smart. It needs to be evidence-based and preserve the integrity of our sustainable finance market. We cannot throw the baby with bath water, and this market, what it needs is consistent, high quality, meaningful, comparable data to assess risk and opportunity. We need targeted reporting yes, to lighten the burden of companies, but we need that reporting, and we need to remember, that, reporting is just the means towards an end, and you cannot measure, and you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So that reporting is also an exercise that companies need to do if they want to achieve net zero by 2050. So cutting 80% of the companies from sustainable mandatory reporting is not a good way forward. Yeah, Europe, as said, has taken a lot of effort to build the world's leading sustainable finance framework. Let's not, lose that leadership. Now, what I would like, if there is one message I have for you today, is that the Savings and Investment Union is an incredible opportunity, but it really needs to go hand in hand with the Sustainable Finance Framework. It will only be then if we manage to channel, European savings, to finance the green transition, but also digital transition and the other European priorities that we will succeed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
No sé.
Now? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Elena, for such an insightful opening. I think really setting the scene and understanding all of the track record, the motivation and the why and what is happening, really the reaction is very useful for all of us to better understand the ambition of the Sustainable Finance Framework. So I would like to jump to, you were talking about how we have 27 fragmented markets. I would like maybe to jump into one of them, Spain. I'm joking, of course. So no, but I would like to ask Juan Carlos, as someone that is working very closely with the regulators and the financial institutions in Banco de España. So how would you describe the systemic readiness of Spain, Spain's banking sector, to integrate ESG and the different frameworks that Elena just shared with us? Could you maybe give us some insights, please?
Sure. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to EA University and Alinea for this platform, excellent platform. And before to answer you, I would like to react just a little about the comment from Elena, no? Because I think that the taxonomy was an excellent tool to incentivating private capital investments to sustainable projects, but for investors, no?
Yeah.
But now I think that taxonomy is used in everything. Whatever you think about taxonomy, in every aspect of our life, in politics, in economics, in different sectors, taxonomy is there, but the purpose was focused on how to incentivize private investment, no? And my second comment, my second reaction is taxonomy needs to be much more sensitive about transition. No? But
I'll get back to you.
let me answer to your question, no? And I have the privilege to work hand in hand with the financial industry from the very beginning, 8-9 years ago, in the Spanish Banking Association, with most of the Spanish banks, and I've seen different cycles that in some way support part of your question, no? The readiness of the industry. And at the very beginning, it was a time of awareness. It's trying to understand the concept related to sustainable finance and try to involve the culture of organizations and with other stakeholders. So it was a time of knowledge alignment and commitment. Then, very, very rapidly, the supervisory expectation and stress testing focus on risk management. Everything was related to that. And it was very important because we built something very solid when we are talking about sustainable finance related to resilience and risk management. Data, models, standards, tools, etc. was risk appetite framework was essential for that. No? Meanwhile, most of the banking entities, most of them, the more resources, etc., trying to integrate sustainability into the strategic agenda, in the culture of the organizations, and in the governance models. However, in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, this movement changed once again, and the banking entities was very involved in public policy departments, just because, as you know, we claim very strong that this very complex, inconsistent, and in some way incomplete regulatory framework, we need to finish on that in order to advance, to digest all this information in order to advance. But now, for different reasons, from Trump, European Union, whatever you think, sustainability, ESG is evolving. And now I think, and I see that these concepts are much more pragmatic, are much more business-oriented. So in that way, I think that now it's the time to integrate these ideas into the strategic agenda, but with a very forward-looking perspective, focus on the transition, especially in these difficult to abate sectors. So the banking industry, in some way, is financing all this transformation from the beginning, but time to time, much more involved in the strategic agenda. So I'm not sure on that. I am very proud of the banking industry, Spanish banking industry leadership on this field. And I think that we are an excellent example. But from my current situation in the Bank of España, I would like that if you want to be solid in this future perspective, in this transformative situation in the following year, we need to be focused also in resilience. No? So we need data to analyze the climate risk management. We need data. We need standards. We need things that we are now debating, and I am quite concerned on that because we can put at risk the risk management approach. Thank you.
I know how to do this now. So from what you're saying, two things that I take. First, that aligns with what Elena was saying, that we're not investing as much as we should in adaptation, that at the end of the day, that is generating resilience, basically because you're adapting to future risk. So somehow you believe that this should be the way, I guess. And the second is, this is not so much a reaction from the banking industry as it was some years ago, more a true strategic shift, no? And this kind of, and businesses are starting to understand this as a source of competitiveness, no? And a new way of doing business, which is kind of aligned with the results we have from the survey, I would say. I would like to jump to Tony. So from now, well, Tony, of course, he's head of sustainability at BBVA. I tend to say BBVA. So I would like to ask you, so have reporting and taxonomies helped banks promote sustainable finance and decarbonization? What's your take on that? How do you say this? How do you see this new reality?
Okay. No, thanks for Isabella. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Great to be here. Congrats for the initiative. I'm going to explain our views as a bank, no, not as an investor or asset manager. I'm focusing on bank's role. The feeling that we have in general, sustainable finance regulation have been focusing a lot on the role of capital markets. But we have to remind that 80% of the EU economy is financed by banks. So through lending and advisory service, we play a critical role. And we agree that with all that has been developed in the last few years has been critical, no? And in fact, we are already using, obviously, taxonomy and disclosure for our purposes in terms of to help our clients in the transition, also to assess risk. So we use taxonomies to sometimes define some products and to have an internal taxonomy that help us to identify what makes sense or not make sense in terms of climate impact, environment impact. So that is already happening. Or we use, obviously, disclosure from our clients in terms of to assess the client's transition plans, no? To assess their resilience on climate change and adaptation as well. So, I mean, there is a critical role that has been played there. But let's say that how we see this is we need something else. I mean, this is not enough to mobilize finance at the scale that we need. No, although it's already happening, because as the platform has developed some reports about the taxonomy, how it's moving and increasing capital flows to taxonomy aligned activities. We think that at the end of the day, what is important, okay, simplification is necessary, as said by Elena, no? We think that simplification, we have to make a huge effort on financial simplification, but also we have to work on climate industrial policies. So, and this is where we connect with the clean industrial deal. But focusing on simplification, we also agree that we have to have the right balance, no? For instance, on the corporate disclosure, this idea to not having information from mid-caps, companies from 250 employees to 1,000 employees, from a bank's perspective, is a bad decision. Because we need information from our clients. We need a minimum mandatory information for those mid-caps in order to know them very well and advise properly, and also to assess risk. So then we have lack of consistency. If we simplify that, but we have the supervisors asking us to manage risk, obviously, we will lack information. So simplification, yes, but we have to think very carefully. Well, we have to work on that. On the other side, on taxonomy, well, maybe probably the do no significant harm is not working in some activities, in some use cases, especially in our case, for retail exposure. So we need to simplify, radically simplify, do no significant harm if we want to scale and have a better use of the taxonomy. That's our opinion, no? And then simplify the reporting exercise, for instance, for banks. But I mean, there's simplification and consistency. We think that is something that really we want to engage a lot with the work that is being done now with the Commission and other key stakeholders in the European Union about how to change and learn from what they are doing. But as I said, this is not the critical point. The critical point is climate industrial policies, because at the end, the ones that invest are institutions, companies, households, SMEs, and they are not going to invest unless they have economic sense. It makes economic sense. That's the real driver of financing. And that economic sense depends on technology from one side and depends on enabling environment in terms of policy environment to promote those technologies with the right incentives, with faster permitting, with simplified processes that at the end creates the business case for those industries to invest. And then we, as banks, we can finance that. That's the logical. This is our theory of change. So we have been focusing a lot in the past few years on creating the architecture of labeling, understanding, disclosure. This is absolutely critical, yes, but this is not enough at all. I mean, we need create the business case for companies to invest. And that's where we connect with the clean industrial deal that we will come in later, no? So I think if you ask me what else we need, I would say, okay, simplification from one side, but then we need a real ambition on climate industrial policies to create this enabling environment to promote investment on climate.
So what you're saying is, and also so that I can put it together with Elena's comment from before, so the motivation is there with the right framework, okay? The incentives are generated. Simplification would come more, as Elena was saying, when this comes down to the country level, because there's already a framework that is generating the right incentives, let's say it this way. The banks need some type of so that the assets they are funding, that they are adapting to a certain taxonomy, so that you are able to better understand what is it that you're funding, okay? Kind of, let's say it this way. So you need some kind of stability, also looking forward, and not only some kind of taxonomy, but other policies in place like the Clean Industrial Deal, no? So now we go to Gonzalo, and he's going to represent the corporates here. So Gonzalo, how do you see the energy transition evolving in Spain and Europe? What do you think are the key trends and shifts that you're observing from the corporate side?
Okay, good morning to everyone, and thank you for inviting me. And Isabella, really congratulations, Anna, for this initiative that I think is the kind of alliances that we need to accelerate this energy transition. So let me share with you 3 messages. Regarding the energy transition, some sectors are moving well, renewables. In general, they are extremely competitive, so we see photovoltaic fully competitive and moving very fast. Wind is also developing well, however, it's more difficult. Electric cars are moving in spite of the media noise. The reality is that this industry is moving forward really fast, and we see that it's going to be really faster in the next year. However, the rest of the sectors, industry, buildings, maritime transport, are not moving at the necessary speed. So in general, I have to say that the energy transition is not moving at the necessary speed to avoid the worst climate scenario. Second message, as industries, we see that decarbonization is a global and unstoppable trend. Why? Because we think that clean solutions are going to be much more competitive. And this is not just about climate change, it's about competitiveness, and it's about energy independency that is becoming really critical. For this reason, we think the industry of the future will be decarbonized. And there is a global competition to lead this global trend. And we just have to see what's going on in China. So there are huge industrial and economic opportunities, but there is global competition to attract investment. And the third message I wanted to share with you is that Spain is extremely well positioned to take advantage of these opportunities. Why? Because we have land, we have a good industrial base, and especially because we have the best renewable resources in Europe. And this means cheaper energy for the future. However, and we are seeing a lot of industries investing in Spain or trying to invest in Spain. But I agree with Tony, it's not enough to have this potential. What we need are policies that attract investment. We need 2 things, policies and alliances. Policies, and of course financial policies, but also industrial policies, permitting policies, fiscal policies that drive the economy into this direction, because we have to acknowledge that this transition is not easy. And there are a lot of resistances moving from fossil fuels to renewables. So we need policies, we need permitting. And the other thing we need is alliances. We need to work to understand the needs of others, for instance, to understand the needs of industries. We have the chairman of the Spanish Green Growth Group, but we also are launching, for instance, the Q0 Alliance, that is the decarbonization of the industry and giving voice to the demand, because the situation or the challenges in different industries are completely different. For some sectors are finance, for others are not finance, are networks, for instance. So I think for instance, for this reason, Isabel, I think that Alinea is a great initiative because it will bring everyone, to debate on how to move into this direction that is a huge opportunity for Spain. Thank you.
So, I'm going to ask kind of the same question to Gonzalo and Elena. As we have this new geopolitical context and we see that there's a reaction from Europe and we're seeing kind of a trend in deregulation, how do you see the future and how is this affecting corporates? So of course, each of you have a different side of the question. I would like to know your take on this. How do you see what is going to happen? How are we going to react?
Perfect.
Yeah.
But if you allow me, I'm
And
going
you can
to
react.
react.
You
I'm
have to
going to
react.
react because I have to.
Please do so.
It is, and it's the pleasure of the debate. So the first thing is that taxonomy is everywhere, yeah? I want to deconstruct that, but because to a certain extent, I agree. One of the problems that the taxonomy has faced is that all of a sudden it seemed that all the problems under the earth had to be resolved by the taxonomy. And that actually made the taxonomy more complicated because as it was going negotiated, the negotiations were going on, I have to recall everyone that this is a political process as well, right? So as they were going on, a lot of, extra jobs, let's call it, or tasks were added to the taxonomy. So in that respect, I agree with you. But on another, I don't, because we keep talking about the transition, we need, sectoral pathways, which we do, but always in a sort of almost an ambiguous manner, right? And what the taxonomy has done with more or less success is that for the very, very first time in Europe, 27 countries, a parliament and the commission all had to, get themselves around the table and say, okay, let's look at sector A and now deconstruct for each one of the activities in the value chain. What does the transition really mean? What does it mean when we look at that economy, that needs to be net zero by 2050? And I recall it's only 25 years from now, how it would look like and what does it mean for this activity? What does it mean for electricity production? But what does it mean for the transmission? What does it mean, for every single thing around the value chain? With more or less success, we reach an agreement. And I think that on its own, it's an incredible success of the taxonomy. It is because of that other jurisdictions are actually developing their own taxonomy. And we cannot take away the power of that. And that's why it has become, the reference also for public funding, which I would argue, that there's some sense there, but anyway, so we need to understand that. The second point was on transition and actually hits towards the future, yeah? The taxonomy has been over and over accused of not bringing, sufficiently the transition angle, yeah? And that as well, I'm going to challenge, there's a tiny bit of reason in the sense of that the taxonomy is not finished and we still need to include many more activities, particularly enabling and transitional. So in that sense, yes. But I disagree in terms of, number one, anyone here that has worked on green finance knows that, until the taxonomy, there was absolutely no green instrument or green finance or product that would include sectors like steel or cement without being accused of greenwashing. That did not exist. Number two, the taxonomy brought with CapEx, that dynamic angle to it, which speaks to the transition. Because what the CapEx allows you, it tells a company of saying, okay, this is where you are today. This is where I want to get, You can write, as long as at the end you meet the criteria of the taxonomy, you can, all the investments that you made as part of an investment plan that can last 5 years or even up to 10 years, then that they are there to meet that target. So it means that when I talk about 530 billion invested already, many of them is to become taxonomy aligned. If that's not transition, Somebody can tell me what transition is? Because at the end of the day, what a transition plan is the sum up of a series of investment plans. With 25 years left, how many transition plans, CapEx investment plans do we need? You know, if it's 5 years in, 5, 4, the taxonomy also allows you, and actually the regulation and ESMA has actually highlighted this point to say, not only, you know, disclose what your CapEx alignment is and what your CapEx investment plan is and how it aligns with your transition plan, but also tell us whether or not you set targets in the future, because today you cannot align with the taxonomy in your first plan, how you align farther on. And that you also say, and what we discover is that from those 1,700 companies, 600 of them are starting to do that because they realize of precisely that alignment. And very quickly, very shortly, for the very first time, this is one of the key calls that we've been asking the platform to the European Commission. It has finally recognized the need for partial alignment, which is you meet substantial contribution, but do no significant harm. You can claim that, or the other way around. So giving it even more dynamism. So I would argue that, yes, we need more transitional activities, but other than that, the transition is perfectly embedded and fits perfectly with transition plans. I'm laughing because I haven't answered your question, sorry, but I realize about time, so afterwards, if you watch the next one.
No, but I think you have to defend it because that's your role here also. So so maybe as we don't have as much time as we would like, I would like to jump to the clean industrial deal because I do think it's important that we cover that in our panel. So I'll start with Tony, and I know Tony and Gonzalo are very aligned here. So you can also jump, and afterwards we'll do some closing with you, okay, Juan Carlos? So the clean industrial deal, it offers a window to Europe to regain industrial leadership through climate ambition. I think there's a space and alignment with the different taxonomies, and it was much needed, this clean industrial deal. Maybe if you want to share with us some insights.
No, I mean, this links directly to what I mentioned, explained before. Now, the need of this. Also, Gonzalo raised that this idea of policies, no, industrial policies, and linked totally with the Draghi's report, with linking sustainability, decarbonization, the competitiveness, how to close the innovation gap that we have in the EU. No? So we think as a bank that the clean industrial deal arrives at the right time, with the right ambition. It's an holistic plan that we are going to work on that for the next 2-3 years. So it's really, really impressive, and covers in general 3 components that we think are critical, no? To create this enabling environment to promote investments, in this case, industrialization, focus on sustainability. No? One is clear signals on generating demand, lead markets. So we need, it was one of, I think it was the first reason why companies invest or not invest in sustainability is the lack of demand. No, so we need demand signals. The clean industrial deal has included some key elements like labeling, on public procurement, and so we think that this is absolutely critical. Sometimes we focus a lot on supply policies, but demand policies are critical to generate that business case that at the end will make the case for investments. No, so demand, policies on demand, this is already covered in the clean industrial. The second layer is that we think that it's important is to have public financing mechanisms that really de-risk those activities that are there. I mean, also Gonzalo explained before, well, we have some activities that maybe the business case is there, like renewable, energy efficiency, even mobility, but then there are a lot of industries that where we don't have the business case there. We still have a green premium, so we need to have blended finance, the risking mechanisms that are critical to have there. So we really assess positively this new decarbonization bank of 100 billion euros. We don't know exactly where the money will come from, but anyway, this is a good goal, and we are very optimistic on that. And the third key component of industry policy is about simplification of processes, faster permitting, all this and avoid fragmentation. This also was common before. And how to, not only for renewable projects, but also for critical technologies, for biofuels, for hydrogen, for carbon capture. We need faster permitting for everything. Otherwise, we are going to lose completely this race. No? So we think the Clean Industrial Deal is a great opportunity for banks, for Europe, for the companies. So and we have only one ask. I mean, from the bank's perspective, no, is to say, let's see banks, the ones that at the end of the day will, together with capital markets, will finance this transformation. So we need. I agree that the saving and investment union is a key, let's say, framework to move on that huge amount of savings that we have that now are not. This is an asset that we have in the EU. Let's say not used for this, but we think that banks can play a key role. So let's see how banks can contribute on the designing of these policies that have to be in place in the next 24 months. Not use banks as the latest arriving to the table, because we can help to share the lessons learned we are having on the field, what is working, what is not working, which are the bottlenecks in the different industries, and then provide some insights, inputs that the, let's say, Commission and other key stakeholders can use to have a smarter regulations. Because we have to, at the end of the day, to make the Clean Industrial Deal bankable. That's the key point. Otherwise, we'll not go. Thanks.
Thanks. So you're saying that we need to also be working on those demand policies, and I heard Gonzalo talk about this a lot, generating markets, okay? Because we're pushing capital flows in one direction, but we need to generate the right markets, no? So all of the pieces need to be integrated there. Yeah.
Okay. First, you mentioned you asked us if there is climate policies and decarbonization policies are losing momentum. The answer for us, for firms, is that they are not losing momentum. What we are seeing is that security of supply is gaining momentum. It's becoming really, really, really strategic. Why? Because we have seen the energy crisis we have suffered in the last 3 or 4 years with the high increase of prices of fossil fuels. And we are understanding now that we cannot have an energy model depending on fossil fuels that come from Russia or even the United States. For this reason, the Clean Industrial Deal is fostering the acceleration of the energy transition for 3 reasons. First is for climate change. Because at Davos, we see there is this inquiry to people who say, what's the main risk for the financial system? They always answer climate change. So climate change. Second driver is energy security. That is becoming so important. It's important in Spain, but when you go to Brussels, you talk to Polish people or to people from Bulgaria, this is the first priority. And if we want to move into this direction, we have to use this driver that is becoming the main driver nowadays. And the third reason is industrial competitiveness. Why? Because we are seeing this global revolution full of opportunities, but also full of competition. So the challenge, we cannot have an industrial policy in Europe fully relying on knowledge and industries from abroad. We need to develop our own industry, but we need an industry that has to be competitive. Why? Because we have to compete in global markets. So if we want to sell electric cars, they have to be competitive. Otherwise, they will not create value and jobs for Europe. So the challenge now is to define policies and financial and grants that move the economy in this direction. But now the position of Europe is really focused on the industry of the future. Why? Because we are understanding, and we are seeing China, for instance, with electric cars, with renewables. We need to understand, to see our competitive advantage and define policies that move into this direction. So there is no a trade-off between competitiveness and climate change, but we have to focus let's put the example of renewables. The more renewables we have, the cheaper the energy will be. Or if we didn't have renewables in this energy crisis, the final prices of energy will have been much higher. So now is the time of Europe, and we need to make decisions, and fast decisions, because we cannot wait another 2 or 3 years, because this energy transition is going really, really fast. So for us, the clean industrial is a huge opportunity, but now we need policies that move into the direction of the industry of the future. Thank you.
Gonzalo, so as we're running out of time, I will do one more question to Juan Carlos, maybe to wrap up, if it's okay. We would be here all morning with you. So the Bank of Spain has created this ESG office, which you're heading now. So now you have to take in all of the comments from our panelists. How do you think that from the perspective of the Bank of Spain, can you address some of the gaps that have, and the opportunities also that have been identified here?
So, thank you, Isabel. And I think it's much more value to link my comments with the previous one, no? Because you are right, Gonzalo. Climate change and decarbonization and competitiveness are linked. But when we are another dimension, which is security, especially in defense, this is much more difficult debate. No, in that sense, I think that the best ingredient, the most adequate ingredient in this trinomy is innovation. So Europe needs to innovate, and I think that, and I link with your comment. No, innovation means that the European Union should choose specific innovative trajectories in defense, compatible with decarbonization, compatible with our European social values, and in some way the leadership in clean tech is a part of the solution. At the same time, if you want to innovate, you need to promote and combine competition policy with industrial policy, because otherwise we need to promote young investors, startups, etc. No? Competition is crucial for that. No? And my final comment is related to the role of the financial institutions, no? Because it's so huge, the amount of money that we need to put on the table for these three elements: competitiveness, security, and decarbonization. There is a huge amount of money that is essential to assure that a solid and resilient financial sector, because otherwise, totally impossible to finance this transformation. And my role in my Bank of Spain office, in that sense, is to try to coordinate inside the Banco de España and also trying to do it outside with the rest of the stakeholders, with you in Alinea. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation today. I think it's been an amazing session, so congratulations.
Thank you.